Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode, Young Atlas, is it's where things kind of start to hit the fan a little bit. So this is the episode where Gunmar is let out, sort of. We find out. Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but this is also the episode where Jim kind of finds out that Strickler's a changeling, because that has been building for a while, and now it's finally a thing. It's finally a thing. So now Jim finally knows, and the way finds out is actually quite interesting. But also, this episode is very fun from a character as a character episode, because the way this works is that Jim he gets a thing from Draal. We'll get to that in a minute, but which means that Jim, for the most of the episode, isn't really acting like himself, and this means that Toby has to step up and be the protagonist for a bit. So, which is a thing that he doesn't normally do. He's usually the sidekick in Trollhunters. He does come into his own a lot in the series, he goes on to because Jim isn't really fit to be a hero at the present. That means that Toby kind of has to. So it opens up with Draal and Jim actually sparring outside of Jim's house in the early morning before school, and of course, Draal quickly picks up that Jim is distracted, and pointing out that Jim is clearly not putting his all into fighting, and that points out that this had been a real fight. He would have lost part of his leg, his fingers, and also his nuts, or grok nuts, as Draal puts it. But of course, Jim apologizes that he's not on his game, pointing out that he's been a little bit distracted, and of course, Draal points out that he's a little confused as to why exactly it is that he would actually be distracted, pointing out that he needs to have his head in the game, and wonders what has him so preoccupied. At which point, Jim tells him that he is worried about kissing Claire, and This of course causes Draal to admit that he actually does not understand what Jim is talking about. So they stop training, and Jim tries to explain the birds and the bees to him, which is funny. But essentially, what happens is that of course Draal points out that he isn't really sure what kissing is, and also explains that he's a little worried about why Jim will be a little confused as to why Jim would be worried about it. But Jim points out that kissing is a way to show affection in the human world, and that's when a man and a woman like each other, their lips touch, and he admits that it goes on for hours, implying sex. So yeah, but of course, it's at this point where he admits that he's a little worried because he admits that he has very strong feelings for Claire, and that he's worried that if he screws up his first kiss, he won't get a second or third or any other down the line, and of course points out that it has been weighing heavily on his mind because they have to do that for the play. So because there is a big kiss scene. There are several kiss scenes in Romeo and Juliet, if you don't know, but. Yeah, of course, Draal points out that he kind of sort of understands where Jim's coming from, pointing out that he doesn't fully understand the concept of kissing. He does understand the concept of having romantic feelings, admitting that he did at one point have romantic feelings for a changeling, and it's presumed that that's the reason why he broke it off. He found out, but in case he goes on to, is this also implied possibly to be Nomura, considering they are also established to have a history? But of course he admits that that what Jim needs is a grit shaka, and of course Jim is confused and wonders if it's a protein shake. But Draal goes on to explain that a grit shaka is a gum totem that they use to ready their minds for battle, and he goes on to explain how the grit shaka, when worn, banishes all cowardice and makes you feel braver it kind of just makes you feel like you could do anything. But and of course he admits that it might be exactly what Jim needs to get through his jitters and just kind of work up the courage to kiss Claire during the rehearsal today. And of course when Jim asks if he has one, Draal merely strokes his chin in amusement. And of course, it's this point where it then cuts to the park, where of course Miss Strickler sits down next to Mrs. Nunez, and she's with baby Enrique, who she still doesn't know is a changeling, and it's at this point where we find out that she is actually the councilwoman for the entire town, which means she essentially runs the town, but isn't the mayor. But she's a very important figure within the town, and of course she then proceeds to get a very important business call and leaves Strickler to watch Enrique. At which point Strickler and not Enrique then proceed to have a little bit of a chat with Strickler pointing out that they're telling him that they're going to be assembling Killahead Bridge today, and that's essentially what they're going to be doing. And of course, what they point, and of course, he points out that Strickler, as a changeling, not Enrique should be there, but not Enrique admits that he really can't leave the house because, as he points out, Jim trashed his house and trying to find out if he was a changeling, and now because of that he's not allowed to leave. And of course, when Strickler points out that realizes that not Enrique's been exposed, he kind of points out that never mind, but of course it's at this point where not Enrique pointed out that there wasn't really much choice, and that they put a gaggle tack to him, and that ultimately he was going to get exposed one way or another. And but of course, Strickler points out that if he's been exposed, then they can't really stay in contact with him anymore. But of course, he points out that he can be useful and that he's seen things, and admits that and then starts talking about all the things he's seen, because revealing first and foremost that he's been down into Troll Market, which catches Strickler's interest, but also goes on to explain how he's noticed the relationship between Jim and Blinky, and does point out that clearly Blinky has developed affection for Jim and came to defend him against Vendel, and of course when he realizes that the fact that Don Enrique has been down to Troll Market a couple of times now, it could be beneficial to him. He tells Not Enrique to keep this conversation between him, and that Ballard doesn't need to know any of this. So and of course, now he then proceeds to tell Not Enrique that from now on he has to report directly to Strickler. And of course, this is this point where Councilwoman Nunez comes back, and Strickler and Not Enrique make a big play that he was just playing with Enrique while she was gone, and then gets up pointing out that they're so cute at that age, and hopes that they could stay that way forever. At which point he leaves. Meanwhile, at school, it's revealed that Strickler, because of the aforementioned opening of Killahead Bridge and finally assembling the bridge, is revealed to have actually taken the day off and called in sick, which means that Coach Lawrence is currently filling in for him, and since Coach Lawrence knows literally nothing about history, he decides to just put Gun Robots 3 onto a projection, much to the rest of the kids' enjoyment. And it's established that this is like a franchise within the franchise. It's we find out later that they have like at least 7 movies, but and of course they're starting to get a little bit played out. But that's the point. It's like supposed to be like, oh, it's this franchise that went on way too long. Isn't that fun? But and that's a thing that happens with a lot of franchises, unfortunately, when people decide that they would rather chase money rather than a good conclusive ending, and unfortunately that's essentially what happens with a lot of things. But of course, it's at this point where during class, Toby of course notices that Jim is nervous, and points out that wonders if he's nervous about the kiss, and of course Jim points out that obviously he is, and points out that he realizes that he's going to have that he's not entirely sure if he can just work up the courage to kind of like talk to her about it. And of course, he also points out that Claire looks obviously very calm about the whole situation, and hopes it's not really a big. It hopes she wonders if he can even face her because of what's going to happen. But what we find out, of course, is that Mary is also having a very similar pep talk with Claire. Obviously teasing Claire about the fact that she has to kiss Jim soon, and points out that seems to be all that's really weighing on her mind currently. And while Claire kind of just tells her out, pointing out that she's not nervous at all, and pointing out that it's just a stage kiss. And Mary points out that that's quitter talk, and then proceeds to point out that it's clear that she needs some sort of that she needs this quick chemistry lesson. And it takes Claire a few minutes to figure out what exactly it is that she means. But by the time she realizes what Mary is about to do, she realizes it's too late. And sure enough, Mary then proceeds to stand up in the middle of class and makes a big play over the fact that Jim stole her seat, when in actuality that is not even close to what happened. And of course, Coach Lawrence doesn't even check to see if everybody's in the right seats. But he's just like, Jim, give her her seat back. And of course, Jim gets back up, and he stumbles a little bit into some other people's desks, and he eventually sits down next to Claire. And he then proceeds to, and it's at this point where Toby tries to give him a pep talk from a distance, telling him to talk to her. And of course, Jim is very visibly nervous, and of course doesn't really know how to talk to her. But then he remembers that Draal gave him a great shaka, and realizing now is a better chance than ever, he then proceeds to put it on. And of course, as Draal said, it vanishes all cowardice from the mind, and Jim is suddenly a lot more confident. At which point he then proceeds to talk up Claire about the whole nervous jitters that they have with the play, and of course they point out the whole scene, and about how they're going to have to kiss, and of course Claire points out that she is a little bit nervous, but does point out that that's probably not going to be that big a deal, and that she's not particularly worried about it, and of course, this is this point where they do start, talking and genuinely trying to get closer to each other. And Jim then proceeds to kind of scoot up his desk next to her. And Toby, seeing all of this, then proceeds to scoot up next to Mary, and tries to ask her out on a date for the play, and wonders if she has one yet. And Mary points out that she's actually in the play, and tells her not to talk to her. So he just kind of backs off, which is funny. But, and of course, this winds up being beneficial in the short term. Jim now has newfound confidence and is able to actually, do things. Is able to actually, be a lot braver than he otherwise would be. And of course, this is most demonstrated when Toby is trying to open his locker and is struggling with it, and whereas Jim is able to get his locker open for the first time by just banging in the right places and getting the lock to release. And of course, Toby is very visibly confused as to how Jim was able to do that, pointing out that he was on his first try. And of course, Jim then proceeds to explain what exactly it is that's going on. Jim received a great shotgun from Draal, and points out that Draal gave it to him to help him talk to Claire, so that he can become closer with him. And of course, Toby asks him to back up a little bit, pointing out that he finds it weird that Draal would be the one giving him lady advice, but of course, he points out that it's not really that's not really what it's for. He admits that it's more for battle and things like that. But he admits that the Grit Shaka does seem to be helping him, because obviously it's helping him become a lot more confident, and enable him to do things that he wasn't able to do before. And he admits that he almost feels like he can do anything. And of course, he then proceeds to leave but Toby, before he leaves, points out that the Grit Shaka made him cool. But then he starts realizing that he's more than cruel, and starts calling himself Crispy, which is a recurring line that he keeps saying throughout the episode. But then he walks off, and while Toby just confused as to how he's just made up a new slang term. But of course, we then proceed to get a montage sequence where we find out that yes, the Grit Shaka did help Jim with his jitters in the short term, but what we find out is that as his day goes on, he gets increasingly bolder and more reckless as things go on. It starts off with him just simply ordering Like, it initially starts with him being able to talk up Claire, but it goes on to just kind of escalate from there. First and foremost, he goes into the cafeteria and starts schmoozing the cafeteria lady, who is offering chicken surprise, and Toby tells him not to order it because as he points out, the chicken surprise causes a lot of people to be sick and ill for the rest of the day, and that's essentially a death sentence. But Jim, of course, orders it, helping no problem, and Toby follows his lead, at which point we find out that they both went to visit the bathroom, and while Toby, of course, is visibly sick, Jim feels very cleansed and wonders what else he can do. At which point, as I said, it continues to escalate. It starts off innocent, but then he starts going into classes he's not supposed to be in. Going and walking into one of Miss Janet's math classes when it's not even a class he's supposed to be in, and incorrectly solving a math problem, with her yelling at him for it, and then also him walking into the student council, not in the student council, but into the teacher's lounge, helping himself to a cup of coffee, even though Coach Lawrence and Senior Earl point out that he's not supposed to be in there. But he points out that merely tells him that it's the best cup of joe they have on campus, and then tells him that even though he doesn't even like coffee, at which point he just walks right out. And both teachers are just visibly confused as to what's suddenly gotten into Jim. And of course, Toby at this point has completely lost track of Jim and has no idea what's going on with him. And walks up to he then runs up to Claire and asks if she's seen him. And of course, she points out that she hasn't, but she has heard that he's been the talk of the school lately. That he's been acting very strange and almost acting weird. And of course, this case in point, we then hear Jim's voice over the loudspeaker, and he reveals that he has since taught himself guitar and proceeds to play a ballad for Claire over the loudspeaker. And then Principal Levitt, who again we don't get to see, but he just walks into the room. We hear his voice, and he stops Jim from coming in, playing the guitar, and just sending him back to class. And Toby just can't help but get secondhand embarrassment for Jim, because obviously this is escalating very much out of control. Meanwhile, all of Gunmar's followers have since assembled. All of them we've met, at least. Otto is there now, and as well as Nomura and Strickler, and also Fragua, and of course they proceed to, and also Bilar, and of course Otto is happy because he points out that now they finally have the final piece of the Killahead Bridge, and now they can finally fully assemble it, and of course Bilar is excited about this as well, because it means they can finally finally have the last step to setting his father free. And then Otto then proceeds to then tells him that it's time to party, and proceeds to pull out the ice stone, which proceeds to assemble into Killahead Bridge, and then we get to finally see the completed Killahead Bridge. And of course Bilar is initially excited, but then is confused when nothing's happening. But of course Otto just tells him to be patient, and sure enough, suddenly the Killahead Bridge springs to life, and a massive wave of energy comes out of it. And it's at this point where we finally meet Gunmar. Sort of. So, essentially what happens is, we can hear Gunmar's voice, and he's voiced by Clancy Brown, which, it is always fun when Clancy Brown voices a villain. I think this is like the second series I've reviewed that has him as the villain, which is fun, but, yeah, we don't really get to see a full picture of him. We get to see his frame, more or less. We get to see that we see his eye, which glows bright blue, but, we don't see him. It's like trying to connect on bad internet with a bad video call. That's essentially what's happening with Gunmar. We can't really see him all that well, but he is able to at least converse between his son and himself. And of course, both Bilar and Strickler walk up to him and try to greet themselves, but they start fighting over each other. Obviously, Bilar points out that that team's release is at hand, and of course they then proceed to fight and argue over each other, mainly to just kind of establish that they're trying to set him free, but also points out that a human has taken the mantle of Trollhunter, and that Strickler won't let him kill him. So, for various reasons, and with Strickler pointing out the obvious point that it would cause too much scrutiny, and eventually, after hearing both of them argue back and forth about it for a bit, it's at this point where Gunmar interrupts both of them, and tells them that he understands completely what exactly is going on with the whole situation. He understands Strickler's point about how obviously they can't just walk in and kill the troll hunter, because obviously that would cause too much scrutiny if a human went missing. But he also points out that it is a little bit insulting that Bilar isn't the one leading the charge. So for that reason, he agrees with Strickler's point, but also tells him that he reports to Bilar now. And of course Strickler is visibly annoyed at this. At which point, Gunmar insists that he would like to speak with his son alone. And it's at this point where Strickler then proceeds to leave the room, while Nomura, Otto, and Frogwa sneer at him a little bit, and he's obviously visibly upset about how that whole conversation transpired. But it's at this point where as they speak alone, Bilar then proceeds to tell Gunmar that he believes that Strickler has gone soft, and Gunmar did kind of pick that up, pointing out that Strickler does seem to not be himself. At which point Bilar points out that because of his changeling identity, he has since become Jim's teacher, and wonders if that is, and points out that it's possible that Strickler may have developed affection for Jim. And when Gunmar points out that he thinks that Strickler's loyalty might be in question, Bilar does agree with him. At which point Gunmar tells Bilar that in order to truly figure out where his allegiance lies, they should test him, and openly admits that he should try something like that. And of course that it points out that they'll need to figure out a way to prove his loyalty. At which point, and he gives him the order to try and figure out how to actually figure out the best way to actually, get Jim to kind of doubt Strickler and put him into a point where Strickler and Jim are forced to confront each other. And of course that winds up happening literally the next episode, so we'll get to that. But of course, meanwhile, we find Toby then proceeds to run into the Hero's Forge, where both Arg and Blinky are currently in the process of doing doing some repairs on the Hero's Forge. Essentially, Arg is using his bulking frame to hold one of the platforms up so that Blinky can climb into the machinery and fix some things. At which point, Toby then proceeds to come in and tells them about what exactly is happening with Jim, about how he's been acting strangely and almost admits that it's almost like he's drunk a little bit, but he admits that Jim is acting not quite himself. He's acting very brave and almost foolhardy, and of course he kind of doesn't fully understand what the name of the thing is that he's trying to tell them, but they kind of guess what it is, and he admits that the problem with it is that it's just causing him to act in a way that is largely unpredictable. And of course, it's after hearing Toby explain it. Blinky then proceeds to deduce that the thing that Draal likely gave him, like essentially Toby just explains that it's Draal's fault that Jim gave something to Jim that's causing him to act weird, and eventually Blinky deduces that it's a grit shaka. He deduces that the grit shaka is most likely causing Jim to act in a way that's unpredictable, but also points out that the way it's designed to work, as Toby described it, is designed to work on troll physiology, and wonders how it would affect a human. And sure enough, the whole Jim starts acting crispy, or kind of comes to its natural head when he comes to a play rehearsal, and Claire is practicing the lines normally, of course, but then Jim walks in and pretty much just improvises his way through the script. And of course, when Claire obviously points out that that's not the words, and he admits that he knows, but also reveals that he rewrote the script, revealing that he felt it was a bit dated and felt that it needed to be modernized a little bit. And of course, Claire is obviously very visibly annoyed that he rewrote Shakespeare. And of course, Miss Janice points out that he can't just rewrite the script, and points out with all due respect, they've been practicing the quote-unquote dated version. But of course, the only person who's really excited about the new script is Eli, who reads through the script and discovers there's a car chase and is immediately excited. But of course, Jim points out that he lacked something, and that he wanted to give it some action, some romance, and a little as a je ne sais quoi. But of course, Claire points out that of course Claire then proceeds to interrupt him, and when he tries to kiss her, and he tells him that he knows he's trying to act cool, but in actuality he's just coming off as not. But and of course Jim points out that he's not cool. He's crispy and tries to go for a kiss again, but she then proceeds to judo flip him. And then proceeds to tell him that it doesn't really matter what he's calling it. He used to be a nice guy, and now he's acting like a jerk. And then she proceeds to storm off. And Jim, when he realizes he's not going to get a kiss, then proceeds to storm off, claiming he didn't want it anyway. And without either of the leads, it's presumed that the rehearsal just kind of ended. So. And with Eli just being a little bit disappointed that there wasn't a car chase after all. But of course, it's at this point where Jim then proceeds to make his way to Hearthstone Troll Market, where he's sitting down with a tattoo guy and is asking to get a tattoo. And bear in mind, this guy is used to working on trolls who, have stone skin. And so he's just holding a hammer and chisel to Jim's back. And of course, Jim is obviously just very bravely just being like, yeah, I want a tattoo. Give me a heart with a split down the middle of it. It'll be fine. And of course, it's this point where Toby leading the charge. He leads Arg and Blinky to where Jim is, and Blinky quickly realizes that it's a lot worse than he thought, and quickly realizes that Jim is obviously acting a lot foolhardy of himself. He's just behaving in a way that isn't really, great. So, and of course, at this point where Blinky then proceeds to scold Jim, pointing out that there's the obvious problem that he is in fact wearing a good shaka, which is a gum totem, and that in and of itself is more than enough reason to be wary of it. But also points out that it's not really that's causing him to behave in a way that's erratic and unpredictable. With Arg just adding that it's dangerous. And of course, Blinky insists that Jim give him the grit shaka, but he does point out. But Jim points out that's great, and that he's feel like most like himself, and that he's actually better than himself. Does point out that he's very happy with how the grit shaka is making him feel. But of course, Blinky and Arg quickly realize that he's not going to give it up willingly, and then tell him that they really don't want to, but they're going to have to take it. And of course, Jim points out that if they want to take it, they're more than welcome to try. And of course, Toby just kind of tries to defuse the situation, telling them that they really shouldn't go there. But then Jim proceeds to pull out his amulet, and summons his armor. And I'm realizing now, 10 episodes in, that I've never actually shown him in his armor, so we're gonna fix that right now. But he then proceeds to summon his armor, although in a very cocky in way, where he's just like, for the glory of Merlin, daylight is mine to command. But yeah, it's just in a very cocky kind of way, like not like in the normal, earnest, like I'm the hero, I'm going to summon my armor kind of way. More like, I'm going to do this because I feel confident, and I feel like I can do anything, and I feel invincible, that kind of thing. But, and of course, with now donning his armor, Jim then proceeds to do it. Jim then proceeds to briefly fight with Arg, who tries to catch him, but Jim quickly demonstrates that he is a lot more nimble than he was, and proceeds to take off and race through the streets of Troll Market. Whereas while Blinky is momentarily impressed by the fact that the grit shaka has clearly changed him, pointing out that Jim never used to be that nimble before. After a glare from Toby, he then points out that that's ultimately a new point, and they proceed to chase after him. And of course, they point out that if Bilar, as they're chasing him through the streets, they point out that he needs to give up the grit shaka, because if Bilar were to fight Jim in this state, he would die. He would just straight up be defenseless, and there would be nothing he could do to defend himself. And of course, Jim points out that he'll show all of them by first and foremost attacking one of the awnings in Hearthstone Troll Market to fling a bunch of gnomes at them. But then also declares that he's going to go and fight Balar, and that nothing is going to stop him and stand in his way. And he just broadly boasts about how he's going to go defeat Balar and end his reign of tyranny once and for all. At which point he leaves. And of course, Blinky points out that it's probably going to be fine because, as he points out, Jim has no real way of locating Balar, let alone going to fight him. But this is this point where Toby points out that that's not entirely true. And then proceeds to go to Claire's house, where he tries to call to Not Enrique from the outside his window. And Not Enrique comes to the window of Enrique's bedroom and tells him to go away, because he's going to blow his cover. But of course, Toby insists that they talk, pointing out that obviously he knows that Jim would have likely have told Balar told Jim where to find Balar. And of course, Not Enrique points out that he doesn't have to answer anything and tells him to leave him be. But it's at this point where Toby pulls out a pair of sweaty gym socks and tells him that it's his if he tells him where Jim is. And of course, this is this point where Not Enrique just relents. And of course, what we find out is that Jim is currently in the sewer running around trying to find Balar. Toby then proceeds to do a Divine Conquer thing where he sends Arg and Blinky into the sewer where it's mostly safe, at least for them, to kind of just look for Jim, while he stays up on the surface to look. And they don't, and of course, what we find out is that it was previously raining and is starting to clear up. So the sunlight is kind of coming in. So which is why he opted to look on the surface. But in any case, as they're all running around trying to find Jim, Jim is slowly trying to find Balar and is catcalling him, trying to get a rise out of him to see if he can get Balar to come to him. And what we find out is that Fragua is also in the sewer, and when he sees Jim, he immediately goes to go find Balar and tell him that Jim is looking for him. And of course, Jim eventually Toby eventually figures out what Jim is. He eventually finds the exact manhole cover that Jim is underneath, but obviously can't reach him. And of course, is this point where Balar comes out, and of course, Jim very cockily calls him a dirty troll and tells him to face him. And of course, Balar is very visibly confused as to why Jim is acting so uncharacteristically brave. But then he sees the grit shock around his neck and understanding that Jim is wearing a gum totem, and that's causing him to rush foolhardily to his very foolishly to his death. And there's of course it's at this point where they start fighting, and true to Blinky's word, Jim immediately gets the wind knocked out of him and is sent flying through the sewer. And of course this winds up having a benefit where Balar is able to knock the grit shock off Jim, and Jim is finally able to come to his senses, but also seemingly has no memory of how he actually got to the sewer. As he finds out, he's visibly confused as to where he is. He quickly takes a look around and quickly discovers that he's in his armor, isn't able to summon his sword, and also is visibly confused that Balar is standing in front of him, and is visibly panicked. But and of course, Toby realizes that Jim is probably going to die if he doesn't get the sewer open. But and quickly grabs the nearest manhole cover to rip it open. But quickly discovers that's too heavy for him to lift by himself. But then channels his own for the glory of Merlin moment, and I mean that literally. He just screams for the glory of Merlin to give himself a boost of strength, and it works. He just rips the manhole right out of the hole, right out of the thing. And this of course creates a safe spot for Jim, where Jim is able to hide underneath where the sewer manhole cover used to be, while Balar is of course unable to touch him. And of course, this is this point where Blinky and Arg eventually manage to find Jim in the sewer, but Frogwa then proceeds to open a manhole cover himself and cuts off their ability to get closer to Jim. And of course Jim is trying to reach and Toby, but quickly realizes that his armor is weighing him down. And it's at this point where Bilar points out that it's very fitting that he will meet his fate in a sewer, and calls him Young Atlas, which of course causes Jim to have a series of flashbacks where and because this is the exact thing that Strickler used to call him. And he realizes now that Strickler is in fact a changeling. He quickly realizes that's like Bilar's way of telling him, hey, this guy he's a changeling. Go deal with that. And of course, it's at this point, and of course, Jim is trying to figure out how to get out of the sewer, and eventually he calms himself, is able to successfully dodge several of Bilar's sword strikes, and eventually realizes he can use Bilar to get to Toby and get out of the and leap out of the sewer. And sure enough, and of course, Jim then proceeds to tell Bilar that he may have lost the Grit Shaka, but he can still be brave. And it's at this point where he then proceeds to desummon his armor, leaps onto Bilar's sword, and as Bilar finally pries his sword out of the ground, Jim is able to grab onto Toby's arm and is able to get out of the sewer, and they just barely manage to close the sewer before Bilar tries to punch them and swipe at him with his claws, because he can just barely reach. And of course, the two of them then proceed to collapse, exhausted. And with Jim then proceeding to point out that he now realizes that obviously Strickler's a changeling. And while Toby then points out that he had never actually trusted Strickler in the first place, so he's not really surprised. And of course, Jim points out that he appreciates Toby for coming to save his neck, and that he appreciates it and owes him one. And of course, Toby points out that's no problem, that's what friends do, but does tell him that maybe just never, as that favor, never use the word crispy again. And which, of course, Jim points out is a deal. And it's at this point where we finally get the end of the story, of the episode, where of course Strickler has since found out that Bilar calls Jim Young Atlas and is visibly annoyed that he's now been compromised. And of course, proceeds to tell Bilar that to his face, pointing out that it's a thing that he calls him, not now Jim knows he's a changeling, and he's been exposed, and points out that that was a very stupid thing for him to have done. But then Gunmar reveals from Killhead Bridge that he's the one who gave the order. And of course, Strickler immediately backs down when he realizes that it's Gunmar who told Bilar to call Jim Young Atlas. And of course, Bilar also adds that Strickler should have seen his face, because he was very obviously felt betrayed. He felt like someone he knew had suddenly just become someone he didn't really know all that well at all. And of course, when Strickler wonders why exactly it is that they would do this, it's at this point where Gunmar points out that it's actually a test. And of course, and tells him and when Strickler asks him what kind of test, it points out to see where his loyalties lie, and to determine that, and also to determine that Strickler, of course, will in fact be able to kill Jim when the time is right, because now he's essentially forced Strickler into a situation where he has to fight Jim now. It's pretty much inevitable at this point now, because now Strickler has been exposed to Jim, and Jim now knows Strickler's a changeling. So eventually they are going to have to fight, and that doesn't in fact happen very next episode, but they are going to have to fight now, and of course that's exactly what Gunmar wanted to set up for this episode, for the next episode. That's he wanted Strickler to be put into a situation where we would have to kill Jim. And of course, since Strickler, of course, has been putting off doing that for obvious reasons, he doesn't want to kill Jim. Of course, Jim's one of his students. There's an obvious reason for that, but he has to. And also, as I mentioned, now Jim has to make up some ground with Claire again, which will happen another episode from now. But Of course, this episode is mainly about Toby, I should mention. From a character standpoint, obviously there's some things that continue the narrative where now Jim knows Strickler's a changeling and is going to have to fight him at some point. But this episode is also very much about Toby, because Jim is wearing a Grit Shaka, and because the Grit Shaka is designed to cause Jim to very much not act like himself and just kind of rush into a battle against Bilar very, very foolishly, And, you know, without any real chance of him winning, especially since, you know, he wasn't really acting like a troll hunter should. Toby had to step up and save his friend's ass. Essentially, that's what the episode was about. Just you know, Toby having to walk up, save Jim from himself, and he does it. And that is a very heroic thing that Toby does in this episode. Jim didn't really know but know well enough to know that the grit shotgun wasn't good for him. So Toby had more so Bilar, in fact, quite literally Bilar. But Toby had to knock some sense into him and point out that the grit shotgun wasn't helping him, and they essentially had to stage an intervention to get the grit shotgun away from him. And it doesn't work out, but Jim does in fact learn his lesson about never to use a shortcut. But he does gain some newfound bravery from that, because now he knows how to act brave without, you know, acting foolish. So you know, kind of an important lesson that Jim learns in this episode as well. But in any case, that is gonna do it for this review of Trollhunters. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks down on my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. But also, be sure to go check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. Please go check those out. I would very much appreciate it if you did so. Go and check out my Patreon. Go and check out the videos linked in the end screen as well. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. There's a bomb video is video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me, and I still have no idea where it's going to send you. Probably more Trollhunters if I had to guess, but I have no idea. So, in any case, yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!